The restaurant buzzed with an air of exclusivity, the kind of place where whispered conversations carried the weight of multi-million-dollar deals. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished mahogany tables, and the faint clinking of silverware created a rhythm that felt almost orchestrated. Christopher adjusted his cufflinks, his tailored suit fitting him as perfectly as the life he had built. Tonight was crucial, a deal that would cement his company's dominance in the market. "Gentlemen," he began, his tone authoritative yet inviting, "this partnership will redefine—" "Excuse me," came a soft, almost trembling voice from beside the table. Christopher paused mid-sentence, his gaze drifting toward the source of the interruption. A waitress, balancing a tray of sparkling glasses, stood with her head slightly bowed, waiting for permission to serve. He almost dismissed her presence until she lifted her eyes. Time stopped. His breath hitched as he stared into a pair of eyes that were unmistakable, hauntingly familiar, and yet utterly impossible. The tray in her hands wobbled slightly, and he noticed how her knuckles turned white as she gripped it tighter. She froze too, her expression a mix of shock and fear, as if caught in a moment she hadn't prepared for. "Emma," the name escaped his lips in a whisper, almost inaudible against the background noise. The waitress blinked, her lips parting as if to respond, but instead, she quickly set the drinks down and turned away, disappearing into the crowd of elegantly dressed diners. Christopher remained frozen in his seat, his mind racing. It couldn't be her. Emma was dead. She had been gone for 12 years. Her life tragically cut short in a car accident that had left him broken for years. "Christopher," one of his associates prompted, bringing him back to the present. "Is everything okay?" "Excuse me for a moment," Christopher said abruptly, pushing back his chair and rising to his feet. The polished soles of his shoes clicked against the marble floor as he weaved through the tables, searching for her. The restaurant's opulent decor blurred around him. All he could see was her face. He found her near the kitchen entrance, her back turned to him as she hastily removed her apron. "Emma," his voice was louder this time, firm and demanding. She flinched, but didn't turn around. Instead, she tried to walk away. Christopher's long strides closed the distance between them, and he gently grabbed her arm, forcing her to face him. "It's you," he said, his voice low but intense. "I'm not imagining this. Emma, it's really you." The woman stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, shaking her head, she pulled her arm free. "I'm sorry, sir. You must be mistaken." "Mistaken?" His disbelief turned into a mix of frustration and desperation. "Don't do this. Don't lie to me. It's me." "Christopher." Her eyes darted around the room, clearly uneasy with the attention they were drawing. "Please, I don't know who you think I am. I have to get back to work." "Emma, wait." She walked away quickly, disappearing through a staff-only door before he could stop her. Christopher stood there, his mind reeling. The resemblance was too perfect to be coincidence. It wasn't just her face. It was the way she carried herself, the way she had looked at him, even if only for a fleeting second. But if it really was her, then how? How could she be alive after all these years? Christopher returned to his table, but his appetite for business and food had vanished. His associates exchanged concerned glances, whispering among themselves, but he paid them no attention. The evening ended in a blur, and as soon as he could excuse himself, Christopher left the restaurant. Sitting in the back seat of his sleek black town car as it wound through the city streets, he couldn't shake the image of her face. His thoughts raced back to the accident, the crash that had claimed her life. He had identified the wreckage, mourned her, tried to move on, but now, those memories felt like a cruel joke. The car pulled up to his penthouse, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of New York's skyline. Yet tonight, the city's lights held no comfort. Standing by the window, he sipped a glass of bourbon, his reflection staring back at him. "Emma," he whispered to himself, "what happened to you?" The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered and maddening. There was only one way to find out. Tomorrow, he would return to that restaurant and make her talk. Christopher placed the glass down, determination hardening his features. If Emma was alive, if there was even the slightest chance that she was telling the truth, he needed answers, and he wasn't leaving without them. Christopher barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, memories of Emma flooded his mind, each one more vivid than the last. He could almost hear her laugh, see the way her hair caught the sunlight, and feel the warmth of her hand in his. It was as if his mind had opened a door he thought had been locked forever, and now the flood of emotions was impossible to contain. By the time the first rays of sunlight peeked through the city skyline, he was already dressed and seated in his office. He had canceled all his meetings for the day. Nothing mattered more than figuring out how Emma, the love of his life, was alive and working as a waitress in New York. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. His assistant knocked lightly before stepping inside. "Mr. Langston, you asked me to dig into the background of an employee at La Lumiere, the restaurant where you dined last night." Christopher nodded, his gaze fixed on the file she held in her hands. "I couldn't get much. Her name is Emma Reed, and she's been working there for about a year. Her file lists no references and no previous employment history, which is unusual. She keeps a low profile, sir. That's all I could find without raising suspicion." "Thank you, Maria," Christopher said, taking the file. "That will be all for now." As soon as the door closed behind her, Christopher opened the file and stared at the single photo attached to Emma's profile. It was a recent picture, her face slightly older, but still carrying the same features he had memorized years ago. Her eyes seemed weary, as if they carried the weight of something far too heavy for one person. He leaned back in his chair. Clutching the photo, his mind drifted back to the first time he met Emma. She had been the life of the party, her energy infectious and her laughter lighting up the entire room. They had been young and reckless, living in the moment and falling in love faster than either of them had expected. But then came the accident. The memory was as sharp as a blade. He remembered the phone call, the panic, and the drive to the crash site. The wreckage was barely recognizable, and when the coroner confirmed Emma hadn't survived, it felt like his world had shattered into pieces he could never put back together. For years he had carried the guilt of that night. If only he had been there with her. If only he had told her not to take that trip. He blamed himself for her death, even when everyone told him it wasn't his fault. But now, after 12 years of grieving, he felt a new emotion creeping in. Anger. Anger at Emma for disappearing, for letting him believe she was gone, for letting him mourn her. What kind of reason could justify such a betrayal? What kind of danger could have been so great that she chose to vanish? Determined to confront her, Christopher decided he couldn't wait any longer. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door. Emma sat in her small, sparsely furnished apartment, staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Her hands trembled slightly, though she wasn't sure if it was from the lack of sleep or the fear that gripped her chest. Seeing Christopher again had shaken her to her core. She had known this day might come. New York was a big city, but it wasn't impossible to cross paths with someone from her past, especially someone like Christopher Langston. But no amount of mental preparation could have readied her for the reality of it. Her fingers brushed the edge of an old photo tucked away in a worn envelope on the table. It was the only thing she had kept from her old life. A picture of her and Christopher, smiling on a beach during a weekend getaway. She didn't dare keep it anywhere visible, not after everything that had happened. Her thoughts raced back to the accident, the flashing lights, the sound of shattering glass, the unbearable pain. She had woken up days later in a hospital bed, miles away from home, her body broken and her mind a foggy mess. It had taken months for her to recover physically, and even longer to piece together fragments of her memory. And then the threat started. A shadowy figure had visited her hospital room, warning her to stay away from Christopher, to disappear, or else both their lives would be in danger. She didn't know why, but she had believed him. The fear was too overwhelming to question. Now, seeing Christopher again, all those old fears were bubbling to the surface. Could she trust him? Would he understand? Or would her presence only bring danger back into his life? A sharp knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. Her heart raced. She stood frozen, unsure of what to do. "Emma, it's me." Her stomach sank at the sound of his voice. She hadn't expected him to find her so quickly, taking a deep breath. She walked to the door but didn't open it. "Christopher, you shouldn't be here. I'm not leaving until you talk to me," he said firmly. "I need to know the truth." Emma rested her forehead against the door, her resolve crumbling. "It's not that simple." "Then make it simple," he replied. "You owe me that much." Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. She had spent years building walls around her heart, but hearing his voice, The same mix of determination and vulnerability made those walls tremble. Slowly, she unlocked the door. Emma stepped back as the door creaked open, revealing Christopher standing on the threshold. His intense gaze held hers, a mix of relief, frustration, and something deeper she couldn't quite place. He stepped inside, his presence filling the small apartment, and closed the door softly behind him. She avoided his eyes, motioning awkwardly toward the couch. "You can sit." "I'm not here to sit, Emma," Christopher said, his voice low but steady. "I'm here for answers." Emma's fingers twisted together as she walked toward the tiny kitchen, pretending to busy herself with the coffee mug she'd abandoned earlier. "There's nothing to explain." "Don't insult me," he snapped, his tone sharp enough to make her flinch. "You let me think you were dead for 12 years. I grieved for you, Emma. His voice cracked, but he quickly steadied himself. "I need to know why." The raw pain in his words made her chest tighten. She set the mug down with trembling hands and turned to face him. "Do you really think I wanted this? Do you think it was easy for me to disappear? To leave everything behind?" Christopher stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Then tell me, what happened that night? Why did you leave?" Emma took a deep breath, her hands clutching the edge of the counter as if grounding herself. "The accident," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't remember much of it. Just flashes, lights, glass shattering, the sound of metal twisting. I woke up in a hospital bed days later, miles away from where it happened." She paused, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I didn't know who I was at first. They said I was lucky to be alive, but my memory was gone. For months, I didn't even remember your name." Christopher's face softened, but the tension in his posture remained. "And then," Emma's voice wavered. "Slowly, pieces started coming back. I remembered you, us, everything. But before I could figure out what to do, someone came to the hospital, a man I didn't recognize. He told me to disappear, that if I tried to contact you or anyone from my old life, we'd both be in danger." Christopher's brows furrowed. "Danger? From who?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking. "But he knew things about you, about your family. He said they wouldn't hesitate to hurt us if I stayed. I believed him, Christopher. I was terrified." He stepped back, running a hand through his hair as he tried to process her words. "So, you just left, without questioning it, without trying to come to me." "I didn't have a choice." Emma's voice rose, tears streaming down her face. "I was alone, confused, and scared, and by the time I thought about going back, too much time had passed. I thought, maybe you'd moved on. Maybe it was better this way." Christopher let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Better? You thought it was better to let me believe you were dead?" Emma looked away, guilt etched across her face. "I didn't know what else to do." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, broken only by the muffled sounds of the city outside. Christopher finally sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "This doesn't make any sense," he muttered. "Who would want to keep us apart, and why?" Emma hesitated, her voice trembling as she said, "You know your family has enemies." "Christopher, powerful ones. Maybe it was them." Christopher looked up, his jaw tightening. "If someone thought they could control me by taking you away, they were wrong. But if this is about my family, I'll find out." Emma crossed her arms, her expression conflicted. "You don't have to get involved. The past is better left buried." "Not when it's been a lie," he shot back. "Not when it cost me 12 years of my life." She sighed, sitting down on the armrest of a chair across from him. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to get to the bottom of this," Christopher said firmly, "and I'm going to protect you." "Emma, I lost you once. I'm not going to lose you again." His words sent a shiver through her, both comforting and unsettling. She had spent so long building walls around her heart, convincing herself that their love was a thing of the past. But now, hearing the conviction in his voice, she felt those walls begin to crack. "Christopher," she started, but he cut her off. "Promise me you'll stay here," he said, his tone almost pleading. "Don't go back to the restaurant. Don't go anywhere until I figure this out. Can you do that?" She hesitated, her instinct to run battling with the urge to trust him. Finally, she nodded. Okay. He stood, his expression softening as he looked at her. Thank you. Without another word, he left, the door clicking shut behind him. Emma stared at the empty space where he had stood, her heart heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. She wanted to believe that Christopher could fix this, that he could protect her, but the fear that had kept her hidden for so long still lingered. She didn't know if love was enough to conquer the shadows of their past. Christopher sat in his car, the engine idling as he stared blankly at the street ahead. Emma's words echoed in his mind. I was terrified. Someone knew things about you. About your family? He couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something far darker was at play, something he had been blind to for years. His family's influence extended far and wide, but who would go to such lengths to tear him and Emma apart? His phone buzzed on the console, snapping him out of his thoughts. He picked it up to see a text from Detective Maxwell Barnes, a trusted investigator he had called on before. Maxwell, meet me at my office. I found something you'll want to see. Without hesitation, Christopher shifted into gear and drove toward Maxwell's modest office on the edge of Manhattan. Maxwell had always been thorough and discreet, a necessity when dealing with matters tied to the Langston family. Inside the small office, the faint hum of a ceiling fan filled the silence. Maxwell, a grizzled man in his late 50s, sat behind a desk cluttered with papers and old coffee cups. He gestured for Christopher to take a seat. I ran a preliminary background check on Emma Reed as you requested, Maxwell began, sliding a thin file across the desk. Her records are sparse. Too sparse for someone who's supposedly been working in New York for years. Christopher opened the file, scanning the few details it contained. She said she's been hiding, that someone forced her to disappear after the accident. Maxwell nodded, lighting a cigarette. That tracks with what I found. Or didn't find. No tax records, no credit history until about 3 years ago. It's like she didn't exist before then. Christopher's jaw tightened. Do you think she's lying? Maxwell exhaled a cloud of smoke, his sharp eyes meeting Christopher's. I don't think so. But someone's been covering her tracks. And not very subtly. Whoever they are, they're sloppy but dangerous. Christopher leaned forward, his voice low. She mentioned threats against both of us. Is there any connection to my family? Maxwell smirked grimly. Isn't there always? He pulled out another sheet of paper and placed it on the desk. I found this in an old police report from around the time of Emma's accident. A witness claimed they saw a black SUV parked near the crash site, but it was never followed up. Guess who owned the car? Christopher's stomach twisted. Langston Corporation. Maxwell nodded. Your father's name is all over the original registration. Officially, it was reported stolen a week before the accident, but it's too convenient to ignore. Christopher felt a cold wave of realization. His father, Charles Langston, had always been ruthless in business, willing to cross lines to protect the family empire, but orchestrating an accident, threatening Emma, the idea seemed unthinkable, yet the evidence was mounting. Does my father know you're looking into this? Christopher asked. Not yet, Maxwell said, stubbing out his cigarette. But if he's involved, he'll find out soon enough. Men like Charles Langston don't stay in the dark for long. Christopher clenched his fists. I need proof, solid proof that ties him to this. Maxwell raised an eyebrow. And when you get it, what then? Christopher didn't answer immediately. His mind raced with conflicting emotions. Anger, betrayal, and a desperate need for justice. Finally, he said, I'll decide when the time comes. For now, keep digging. I'll pay whatever it takes. Maxwell nodded, his expression unreadable. You're the boss. Meanwhile, back at Emma's apartment, she sat nervously by the window, her eyes scanning the street below. Christopher's insistence that she stay put had rattled her. It had been years since she had felt truly safe, and the thought of being found again filled her with dread. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, the sound making her jump. She picked it up to see a message from Eleanor, her co-worker at the restaurant. Eleanor. Hey, where are you? The manager's freaking out that you didn't show up. You okay? Emma hesitated before typing a reply. Emma, I'm fine, just needed a day. Can you cover for me? A moment later, Eleanor responded, Eleanor, sure, but you owe me. Let me know if you need anything. Emma set the phone down with a sigh. She appreciated Eleanor's help, but knew she couldn't explain the real reason for her absence. Not yet. Her thoughts were interrupted by the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway outside her door. She froze, her breath catching as the steps grew louder. Someone stopped directly in front of her apartment. There was a brief pause, and then a soft knock. "Emma?" A familiar voice called. "It's me, Eleanor." Relief flooded her as she opened the door. Eleanor stood there with a concerned look on her face, holding a bag of takeout. "You didn't sound like yourself earlier, so I brought you something," Eleanor said, stepping inside. "What's going on?" Emma forced a smile, taking the bag. "It's nothing, just a lot on my mind." Eleanor studied her for a moment, her expression softening. "Well, if you need to talk, you know where to find me." "Thanks, Eleanor," Emma said quietly. "I mean it." As Eleanor left, Emma closed the door and leaned against it, clutching the bag tightly. For the first time in years, she felt the walls closing in. Secrets she had buried were clawing their way to the surface, and she didn't know if she had the strength to face them. And thus, at the same time, Christopher stood in his penthouse, staring out at the city below. The weight of the day pressed heavily on his shoulders. If his father was involved, it meant the betrayal ran deeper than he had ever imagined. He took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. "I'll protect her," he murmured to himself, "no matter what it takes." The next morning, Christopher sat in his office, staring at a framed photo on his desk. It was an old picture of his family, himself, his father Charles, and his late mother. The smiles in the photo felt hollow now, given what Maxwell had uncovered. The thought that his father might have orchestrated the accident that tore Emma from his life gnawed at him. His intercom buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. "Mr. Langston," Maria's voice came through. "Mr. Barnes is here to see you." "Send him in," Christopher replied, sitting up straighter. A moment later, Maxwell entered, carrying a folder thicker than the last one. "I've got more for you," Maxwell said, placing the folder on Christopher's desk. "But I'll warn you, it's not pretty." Christopher flipped it open, scanning the contents. There were surveillance photos, financial records, and more damning details about the Langston Corporation's involvement in questionable dealings. One page in particular caught his eye, a transfer of funds from a shell company linked to his father, made just days before Emma's accident. The recipient, an offshore account under an alias. "This proves he was funding someone," Christopher said, his jaw tightening. "But who?" "I'm still working on that," Maxwell replied. "But there's more. Look at this." He handed Christopher another document, a copy of an email flagged during their investigation. The message contained a chilling directive. "Ensure the girl is removed. No loose ends." Christopher's hands clenched into fists as he read the words. "He really did it," he muttered, anger boiling beneath the surface. "He ordered the accident." Maxwell leaned back in his chair, lighting another cigarette. "Looks that way, but if you want to take this public, you'll need more concrete proof. Right now, this is circumstantial." Christopher closed the folder, his mind racing. "I need to confront him. He's not going to wiggle his way out of this." Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "You sure that's a good idea? Guys like Charles don't take kindly to being cornered." "I don't care," Christopher said firmly. "He's hurt too many people, and I won't let him hurt Emma again." Meanwhile, Emma sat in her apartment, restless. Christopher had insisted she stay put, but the isolation was suffocating. She stared at her phone, debating whether to text him, when another message from Eleanor came through. "Eleanor, hey, just heard something weird. Some guy was asking about you at the restaurant. Said he was a friend of yours." Emma's stomach dropped. She typed back quickly. "Emma? What did he look like?" Eleanor replied within seconds. "Eleanor. Tall, dark suit. Kind of intimidating. Didn't leave a name. Should I be worried?" Emma's fingers trembled as she responded. "Emma, if he comes back, don't say anything about me, please." She set the phone down, her heart pounding. It wasn't hard to guess who the man might have been, a reminder that the threats she had fled from were still very real. She needed to warn Christopher. Later that afternoon, Christopher arrived at his father's estate. The sprawling mansion, with its pristine lawns and towering columns, exuded power and wealth. But today, it felt oppressive. He found Charles in the study, seated behind a massive oak desk. The older man looked up as Christopher entered, a faint smile on his lips. "Christopher, to what do I owe this surprise?" Christopher didn't bother with pleasantries. He dropped the folder onto the desk, the papers spilling out. "You owe me an explanation," he said coldly. Charles raised an eyebrow, glancing at the documents. "And what exactly am I supposed to explain?" "Don't play dumb," Christopher snapped. "The transfers, the shell companies, the emails. You orchestrated the accident that nearly killed Emma and tore her from my life." Charles leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "You've been busy," he said calmly, "but you should be careful about throwing around accusations you can't prove." Christopher's anger flared. "You're not denying it," Charles sighed, standing and walking to the window. "Everything I've done has been for this family, to protect you, to ensure our legacy. Protect me," Christopher repeated, his voice rising. "You called tearing my life apart protection. You destroyed everything I cared about." Charles turned to face him, his gaze cold. "Emma was a distraction. She was never going to fit into our world. I did what was necessary to secure your future." Christopher stared at him, disbelief etched across his face. "You ruined her life, and mine, for some twisted notion of control." Charles shrugged. "You'll thank me one day. Everything I've built will be yours." "I don't want it," Christopher spat. "Not like this." The room fell into tense silence. Finally, Christopher spoke, his voice low but firm. "Stay away from Emma. If you so much as look in her direction, I'll make sure the world knows exactly what you've done." Charles smirked, an air of defiance in his demeanor. "You're just like your mother, soft, weak. You don't have the stomach to take me down." Christopher stepped closer, his gaze steely. "Try me." He turned and left without another word, the weight of the confrontation pressing heavily on him. Outside, he pulled out his phone and dialed Maxwell. "It's him," Christopher said when the detective answered. "I need everything you can find. I'm taking him down." Back at her apartment, Emma paced the floor, waiting anxiously for Christopher to respond to the message she had finally sent. "Someone's looking for me. I'm scared." Her phone buzzed seconds later, his reply immediate. "I'm on my way." Christopher arrived at Emma's apartment within minutes, his car screeching to a halt in front of the building. He stepped out, scanning the street with sharp, calculated eyes. The weight of his earlier confrontation with Charles still lingered. But Emma's message had pushed his focus entirely on her safety. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding not from exertion, but from the urgency of the situation. When he reached her door, he knocked twice, his voice calm but firm. "Emma, it's me." The door opened cautiously, the chain still latched, allowing Emma to peek through the gap. Relief washed over her face when she saw him, and she quickly unlocked the door, letting him in. "Did anyone follow you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No," Christopher assured her, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "But we need to talk. What happened?" Emma hesitated, her arms wrapping around herself as she paced the small living room. "Eleanor texted me earlier. She said a man came to the restaurant asking about me. He didn't give his name, but he was tall, intimidating, and too interested." Christopher's jaw clenched. "That's not a coincidence. Whoever he is, he's connected to my father. I confronted him today." Emma froze mid-step. "You what?" "I had to," he said firmly. "He's behind everything. The accident, the threats, the years we lost. I couldn't sit back and do nothing." Her face paled as she sank onto the couch. "Christopher, you don't understand what he's capable of. He doesn't just threaten people. He acts on those threats." "I know exactly what he's capable of," Christopher said, sitting beside her. "But I won't let him hurt you again." Emma shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "You don't get it. The last time someone tried to protect me, they disappeared." "I can't let that happen to you." Christopher reached for her hands, his grip firm yet comforting. "Emma, listen to me. I've already lost you once. I won't let it happen again. Whatever it takes, I'll keep you safe." The conviction in his voice made her chest tighten, but fear still clouded her thoughts. "And what if he comes after you next, or your career? He'll destroy everything if it means keeping his secrets buried." Christopher's expression darkened. "Let him try. I'm not afraid of him." As night fell, Emma's apartment seemed quieter than usual, almost unnervingly so. Christopher insisted on staying, refusing to leave her alone. He had taken up a post near the window, his phone buzzing occasionally as updates from Maxwell came through. Emma sat curled up on the couch, her gaze fixed on the coffee table. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Christopher turned to her, puzzled. "Regret what?" "Us," she said softly. "Loving me, knowing how much it's cost you." His expression softened as he walked over and sat beside her. "Never," he said without hesitation. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Emma. Losing you was the hardest thing I've ever faced. If anything, I regret not fighting harder to find out the truth." She blinked back tears, her walls crumbling further. "I thought I was doing the right thing, staying away. I thought I was protecting you. You were protecting me," Christopher said gently, taking her hand in his. "But now it's my turn to protect you." Their moment was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Both of them froze, their eyes locking in shared apprehension. Christopher motioned for Emma to stay put as he approached the door. "Who is it?" he called, his voice steady. "It's Eleanor," came the reply. Christopher glanced back at Emma, who nodded hesitantly. He opened the door just enough to let Eleanor step inside. She looked around nervously, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by unease. "Sorry to show up unannounced," Eleanor began, fidgeting with her bag. "But I thought you should know. The guy who was asking about you earlier, he came back." Emma's breath hitched. What did he say?" Eleanor hesitated, glancing at Christopher before continuing. He wasn't asking questions this time. He was watching. He sat at the bar for over an hour, barely spoke to anyone. Then, just before he left, he asked if you'd be working tomorrow. Christopher's fists clenched, his protective instincts kicking in. "Did you tell him anything?" "Of course not," Eleanor said quickly. "But it was creepy. I thought you should know." Emma sank further into the couch, her worst fears creeping closer to reality. Christopher, however, stood tall, his determination unwavering. "Thank you, Eleanor," he said, his voice firm. "You did the right thing coming here. Let me handle this." Eleanor nodded, casting a worried glance at Emma. "Just be careful, okay?" After she left, Christopher turned back to Emma. "This isn't a coincidence. Whoever that man is, he's working for my father." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "What are we going to do?" Christopher knelt in front of her, his hands resting on her knees. "We're going to stop running. If he wants a fight, I'll give him one, but we're not hiding anymore." She looked at him, her fear warring with the trust she had always felt for him. Finally, she nodded, her voice trembling. "Okay." Far away, in the shadows of Charles Langston's expansive estate, the man from the restaurant reported back. His voice was calm, but his words carried weight. "She knows," he said simply. Charles's voice came through on the other end of the call, cold and deliberate. "Then it's time to make her disappear again." The first rays of sunlight peeked through the blinds of Emma's apartment, casting a golden hue over the living room. Christopher had barely slept. He sat by the window, his phone in one hand and a fresh cup of coffee in the other. Across the room, Emma lay curled up on the couch, her face peaceful in sleep. Despite the chaos surrounding them, Christopher's phone buzzed, and he glanced down to see a message from Maxwell. "Meet me at my office. I've got something big." He stood and moved quietly toward the door, not wanting to wake Emma. Just as his hand touched the knob, her voice broke the silence. "Where are you going?" she asked groggily, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. "To see Maxwell," he replied. "He has something for me. I'll be back soon." Emma frowned, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Are you sure that's safe, after what Eleanor told us?" "I'll be fine," Christopher said reassuringly. "Maxwell's office is secure, and I won't let anyone follow me." Emma bit her lip, hesitating. "Just be careful." He nodded, giving her a small smile. "I will. Lock the door behind me and don't open it for anyone but me." She nodded reluctantly, watching as he left. Maxwell's office was quieter than usual when Christopher arrived. The detective sat at his desk, papers and photos spread out in a chaotic array. He gestured for Christopher to sit as he handed over a file. "This," Maxwell said, leaning back in his chair, "is the missing piece you've been looking for." Christopher opened the file and scanned the contents. It included bank statements, flight records, and surveillance photos, all linking his father, Charles Langston, to the man who had been asking about Emma at the restaurant. "This guy," Maxwell said, pointing to a photo of a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark suit. "His name's Victor Morales, ex-military, now working as a private contractor. He's not just watching Emma, he's been actively tracking her movements for months." Christopher's grip on the folder tightened. "So my father hired him." "Exactly," Maxwell confirmed. "Morales is one of the best at what he does, but even the best leave traces. I found payments from one of your father's shell companies to Morales' offshore account, dating back to before Emma resurfaced." Christopher's eyes burned with fury. "He's been planning this for months. Why, what's he so afraid of?" Maxwell leaned forward, lowering his voice. "It's not just about keeping Emma away from you. There's something bigger at play. Something your father doesn't want the world to know." Christopher's jaw tightened. "What is it?" Maxwell sighed. "I'm still piecing it together, but it's tied to that accident 12 years ago. I dug deeper into the official reports. And guess what? There's no record of Emma's car being towed or inspected. It's like the crash was staged." The room fell silent as the weight of Maxwell's words sank in. Christopher clenched his fists, his mind racing. If the accident had been staged, it meant his father's betrayal was far worse than he'd imagined. "I need more proof," Christopher said finally, his voice cold. "Something that will expose him completely." Maxwell nodded. "I've got a lead. A storage unit rented under an alias connected to your father. It could have the evidence you need." Christopher stood, determination etched across his face. "Let's get it." Back at Emma's apartment, she paced nervously, checking her phone every few minutes. Christopher had been gone longer than she expected, and her unease grew with each passing moment. Her phone buzzed and she snatched it up, hoping it was Christopher. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. "You're not safe. He knows where you are." Her heart raced as she stared at the message. She typed back quickly, "Who is this?" No reply came. Emma's hands trembled as she considered her options. She couldn't call Christopher. What if he was in danger too? But staying put felt equally unsafe. A loud knock at the door made her jump. She froze, her mind racing. Could it be Christopher? Or was it someone else? "Emma, it's me," a familiar voice called. Relief flooded her as she rushed to unlock the door. Christopher stepped inside, his expression tense but calm. "We have to move." "What happened?" Emma asked, grabbing her bag without hesitation. "Maxwell found proof," Christopher explained, his voice low. "My father's been orchestrating everything, from the accident to Morales tracking you. But now that we're onto him, he's going to escalate." Emma's face paled. "What do we do?" Christopher placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze steady. "We're going to take him down. But first, I need to keep you somewhere safe." The car ride was quiet, tension thick in the air. Christopher drove them to a safe house Maxwell had arranged. A small, nondescript cabin on the outskirts of the city. It was far from the luxury Emma was used to seeing in Christopher's life, but it felt secure. As they stepped inside, Emma turned to him. "How do you know this will work, that we can stop him?" Christopher hesitated, his own doubts gnawing at him, but he pushed them aside, meeting her eyes. "Because I won't stop until it does." Emma nodded, though fear still lingered in her expression. I can't lose you again, Christopher." "You won't," he promised, his voice firm. "Not this time." Far away, Charles Langston paced his study, his expression dark. Victor Morales stood silently nearby, awaiting orders. "They're getting too close," Charles muttered. "I want them silenced, for good." Morales nodded once. "Consider it done." As the room fell silent, Charles gazed out the window, a flicker of unease crossing his face. For the first time in years, he felt the faintest crack in the control he had always held, and he didn't like it. The safe house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards under their steps. Emma sat on the worn couch, her knees pulled to her chest, while Christopher stood by the window, peering out into the dark forest that surrounded them. The tension in the air was suffocating. "How long do we have to stay here?" Emma finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not long," Christopher replied, his eyes scanning the tree line. "Maxwell's working on securing the evidence we need. Once we have it, this will all be over." Emma didn't respond. She didn't need to. The fear etched on her face said everything. Christopher turned to her, his expression softening. "I won't let anything happen to you. Trust me." She nodded, though the anxiety in her chest refused to subside before she could respond. Christopher's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. "Maxwell." "Go ahead," Christopher said, answering the call. "I found the storage unit," Maxwell said, his voice urgent. "It's worse than we thought. I need you to come here, alone. I'll text you the address." Christopher frowned. "Why alone?" Maxwell hesitated. "It's sensitive. The less people involved, the better. Just get here as soon as you can." Christopher's gut twisted, but he agreed. "I'm on my way." Ending the call, he turned to Emma. "I have to meet Maxwell. Stay here and lock the doors. Don't let anyone in." Emma's brows furrowed. "You're leaving me here alone." "It's safer this way," Christopher assured her. "I'll be back as soon as I can, just stay hidden." Reluctantly, Emma nodded. "Be careful." The storage facility was tucked away in an industrial area on the outskirts of the city. Christopher parked his car and stepped out, his breath visible in the cool night air. The facility was eerily quiet, the faint hum of streetlights. The only sound, Maxwell stood by the entrance, his face partially obscured by the dim light. He motioned for Christopher to follow him inside. They navigated the narrow aisles until Maxwell stopped in front of a unit. He unlocked the door and slid it open, revealing rows of shelves stacked with files, boxes, and digital storage devices. "This is it," Maxwell said, stepping inside. "Everything your father's been hiding." Christopher followed, his eyes scanning the shelves. "What did you find?" Maxwell reached for a folder on the top shelf and handed it to Christopher. "This," he said, "is proof that your father not only orchestrated the accident but has been manipulating key figures to keep Emma hidden. Bribes, threats. It's all here." Christopher flipped through the folder, his stomach turning as he absorbed the damning evidence. "This is enough to bring him down," he said. His voice low, Maxwell hesitated. "There's more." Christopher looked up, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Maxwell gestured to a small locked box on the bottom shelf. "That box contains recordings of conversations between your father and Victor Morales. It confirms Morales was hired to track Emma and eliminate her if necessary." Christopher's blood ran cold. "Eliminate her?" Maxwell nodded grimly. "Your father isn't just protecting his secrets. He's trying to make sure they die with her." Christopher's grip on the folder tightened. "We need to get this to the authorities." Maxwell's expression darkened. "There's one problem." "What?" Maxwell stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Your father knows I've been helping you. He already sent someone after me. If we're going to do this, we need to act fast." Christopher nodded. "Then we move tonight. I'll make the call." But before he could pull out his phone, the door to the storage unit slammed shut behind them. Christopher and Maxwell spun around to see Victor Morales standing in the shadows, his broad frame blocking the exit. "Going somewhere," Morales said, his voice calm but menacing. Christopher stepped forward, his shoulders squared. "Get out of my way," Morales smirked. "You think this ends with some files and a few recordings? Your father owns this city. You'll never touch him." "Watch me," Christopher shot back. Before Morales could respond, Maxwell lunged at him, catching the larger man off guard. The two men struggled, crashing into the shelves as Christopher scrambled to grab the folder and box. Papers and storage devices scattered across the floor. "Run!" Maxwell shouted, his voice strained. Christopher hesitated, torn between helping Maxwell and escaping with the evidence. But Maxwell's desperate glare left no room for argument. Clutching the items tightly, Christopher bolted out of the unit, his footsteps echoing through the empty facility. Back at the safe house, Emma paced nervously, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. The knock at the door made her jump, her heart pounding in her chest. "Who is it?" she called, her voice trembling. "It's Eleanor," came the reply. Emma froze. Eleanor hadn't been expected. Her stomach churned with unease, but she approached the door cautiously. "What are you doing here?" "I came to check on you," Eleanor said. "Christopher called me. He wanted me to make sure you were okay." Something about her tone felt off. Emma's hand hovered over the lock, her instincts screaming at her not to open the door. Why didn't he tell me? There was a pause, and then Eleanor's voice grew colder. "Open the door, Emma." Emma stepped back, her blood running cold. The warmth in Eleanor's voice had vanished, replaced by something sharp and threatening. "You're not Eleanor," she whispered. The door rattled as someone on the other side tried to force it open. Emma's mind raced. She grabbed her phone and dialed Christopher, her hands trembling. "Emma?" he answered, his voice breathless. "Someone's here," she said, panic creeping into her voice. "They're trying to get in." "Stay hidden," Christopher said immediately. "I'm on my way." Emma grabbed a knife from the kitchen and backed into the corner, her heart pounding. Whoever was outside wasn't giving up. At the same time, Christopher sped back toward the safe house. His mind racing. Morales had gotten away, and Maxwell was injured, but there was no time to waste. The betrayal ran deeper than he had imagined, and now Emma was in immediate danger. "Hold on, Emma," he muttered, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "I'm coming." Emma gripped the knife tightly, her back pressed against the wall as the door shook under the force of whoever was trying to break in. Each thud sent a jolt through her body, her heart racing faster with every impact. She pressed her phone tightly to her ear, listening to Christopher's voice on the other end. "I'm almost there," he said urgently. "Just stay out of sight, don't let them see you." Emma's breathing was shallow, her gaze darting to the windows. The thick curtains provided cover, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The rattling at the door stopped suddenly, and the silence that followed was almost worse. "Christopher," she whispered. "They've stopped." "Don't move," he instructed. "They might still be out there." Emma nodded instinctively. Though he couldn't see her, she edged closer to the kitchen, her fingers trembling around the knife's handle. The seconds dragged into what felt like hours, before the silence outside was broken by a low, muffled voice. "She's in there. Bring her out." Her blood ran cold. There were multiple voices now, confirming her worst fear. This wasn't a random break-in. They had come for her. She crouched low and moved toward the back of the cabin, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The faint sound of footsteps circled the house, followed by the unmistakable creak of a window being tested. When Christopher's car screeched to a halt outside the safe house, he jumped out, not even bothering to close the door behind him, his heart pounding as he ran toward the cabin. From the shadows near the tree line, a dark figure emerged, and Christopher barely had time to react as Victor Morales stepped into his path. "Going somewhere," Morales sneered, his voice calm but dripping with menace. Christopher clenched his fists, his fury boiling over. "Get out of my way," Morales smirked, cracking his knuckles. "Your father warned you to back off, but you just couldn't listen, could you? Now I have to clean up your mess." "You won't touch her," Christopher said through gritted teeth, his stance shifting as he prepared for a fight. Morales lunged, but Christopher was ready. He dodged the first swing and landed a punch to Morales' ribs. The larger man grunted but recovered quickly, countering with a blow that sent Christopher staggering back. The two men traded punches, their grunts and the sound of fists meeting flesh echoing through the night. Buying the came inside the cabin, Emma heard the commotion outside and froze, peeking through a crack in the curtain. She saw Christopher fighting Morales near the driveway. Her heart leapt into her throat. He was outnumbered, as two more men emerged from the shadows. She tightened her grip on the knife, her fear warring with the instinct to help him. But as one of the men approached the back of the cabin, she realized her own danger wasn't over. She needed to act. Steeling herself, Emma slipped into the kitchen and positioned herself near the back door. The handle turned slowly, and the door creaked open. A man stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. Emma held her breath, waiting for the right moment. When he turned toward her, she acted with a surge of adrenaline. She swung the knife, grazing his arm. He yelped in pain, stumbling back, but his reflexes were quick. He lunged for her, knocking the knife from her hand and pinning her against the wall. "You're coming with me," he growled, his grip tightening around her wrist. Emma struggled, fear giving way to sheer determination. She twisted in his grip, slamming her knee into his stomach. The man doubled over, and Emma grabbed a heavy cast-iron pan from the counter, swinging it with all her strength. The impact sent him crumpling to the floor, unconscious. Outside, Christopher was still locked in a brutal fight with Morales. Blood trickled from a cut above his brow, but he didn't relent. Morales landed a heavy blow to Christopher's side, but Christopher used the momentum to drive his shoulder into Morales' chest. sending them both to the ground. "Give it up," Morales snarled, struggling to get the upper hand. "You can't win this." Christopher's eyes burned with fury as he pinned Morales down. "Watch me." With a final surge of strength, Christopher landed a series of punches that left Morales dazed, hearing footsteps approaching. Christopher turned to see the other two men closing in. Before they could reach him, a blaring siren cut through the night air. Red and blue lights flashed as a police car sped down the dirt road, followed by another. The two men hesitated, then turned and bolted into the woods. Christopher stood, his breath coming in ragged gasps as officers poured out of their vehicles. "Christopher Langston," one of them asked. "Yes," Christopher replied, wiping blood from his lip. "The man inside is armed and dangerous. He works for my father, Charles Langston." The officer nodded, signaling to his team to secure the area. Inside the cabin, Emma sat on the floor, her back against the wall as the unconscious man was dragged out by police. Christopher entered moments later, his face battered, but his expression softening when he saw her. "Are you okay?" he asked, kneeling beside her. Emma nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm fine, I've had worse," he said with a wry smile, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's over. You're safe now." Emma shook her head, her voice trembling. "Not yet. Not until he's gone." Christopher's jaw tightened. "He will be. I promise." As the officers secured the scene and took statements, Christopher and Emma sat side by side, their hands intertwined. For the first time in years, they felt a glimmer of hope, but deep down, Christopher knew the fight wasn't over. Not yet. Christopher stared at the glowing skyline through the window of Maxwell's downtown office. His reflection looked worn, battered from the events of the past few days, the weight of his father's betrayal, the near-death encounters, and Emma's fear were pressing down on him. But now, with the final pieces of evidence Maxwell had uncovered, he knew the time had come to put an end to Charles Langston's reign of control. "You're sure about this?" Maxwell asked from behind his desk, his tone cautious. The evidence, bank transfers, surveillance footage, and recordings, was spread across the desk like a web of corruption, every thread leading back to Charles. Christopher nodded, his jaw set. "It's time." Maxwell exhaled slowly. "I've contacted a reporter I trust. She's willing to break the story. But once this goes public, there's no turning back. Your father won't go down without a fight." Christopher's lips tightened into a grim line. "He's already lost. He just doesn't know it yet." Maxwell slid a USB drive across the desk. "This has everything. The recordings, financial trails, and connections to Morales. Take it to her and make sure it gets out." Christopher pocketed the drive, but his focus shifted. "Before this hits the press, I need to confront him, face to face." "That's a dangerous move," Maxwell warned. "If he feels cornered, there's no telling what he'll do." "I have to," Christopher said firmly. "This isn't just about exposing him. It's about making sure he can't hurt Emma, or anyone else, ever again." Maxwell studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Just be careful." Christopher entered the Langston estate for what he knew would be the final time. The air inside was heavy with the smell of aged wood and wealth, but the grandeur felt hollow now. Each step toward his father's study felt like walking toward a battlefield. Charles was seated behind his massive oak desk when Christopher entered, his expression unreadable. He looked up slowly, his sharp eyes narrowing as if sensing what was to come. "Christopher," Charles said coolly, leaning back in his chair. "I wasn't expecting you." Christopher shut the door behind him, the soft click reverberating in the quiet room. He walked forward, placing the USB drive on the desk. "I think you'll want to see this." Charles raised an eyebrow but didn't move to take it. "What's this supposed to be?" "Proof," Christopher said, his voice steady. "Of everything. The accident you staged, the threats, the bribes, everything you did to keep Emma out of my life, and to protect your precious empire." Charles's expression darkened, but he remained composed. "You've been busy. You don't even deny it," Christopher said, his fists clenching. "You destroyed lives. Her life, my life, just to keep your secrets." Charles leaned forward, his tone cold. "You think you understand the choices I've made? The sacrifices? Everything I did was for you, for this family, to protect what's ours. Christopher's voice rose, anger lacing his words. Protecting the family doesn't mean tearing it apart. You didn't protect me. You controlled me. You decided who I could love, who I could trust. And now you've ruined everything. Charles stood, his imposing figure casting a long shadow. You're naive, Christopher. You think love is enough, that you can build a life on sentiment? This world doesn't work that way. I'm done living in your world, Christopher shot back. And I'm done letting you hurt the people I care about. Charles smirked, a dangerous gleam in his eye. And what do you plan to do? Destroy me. You don't have the stomach for it. Christopher stepped closer, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. Watch me. He turned to leave, but Charles's voice stopped him in his tracks. If you go through with this, you're no longer my son. Christopher turned back, meeting his father's gaze. If being your son means becoming like you, I'm glad to walk away. Charles's face twitched, the mask of control slipping for just a moment. But before he could respond, Christopher was gone. Hours later, the story broke. Every major news outlet carried the bombshell. Charles Langston, a titan of industry, implicated in a scandal involving staged accidents, corruption, and coercion. The evidence was irrefutable, and the media frenzy was relentless. At the safe house, Emma watched the coverage with a mix of relief and disbelief. Christopher sat beside her, his hand covering hers. It's over, he said softly. He can't hurt you anymore. Emma nodded, but her eyes glistened with tears. What about you? What happens now? Christopher exhaled, leaning back. I don't know. The Langston name is in ruins, and I'm fine with that. I just want a fresh start, for both of us. She turned to him, her voice trembling. You gave up everything. No, Christopher said, his gaze steady. I gained everything that matters. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face paling. It's Maxwell, she said, answering the call. What's wrong? Maxwell's voice was urgent. Emma, are you with Christopher? Yes, why? There's been a development, Maxwell said grimly. Morales didn't disappear. He's still out there, and he's not done. As Christopher and Emma processed the warning, far away in a dimly lit room, Morales stared at a map spread across a table. A photo of Christopher and Emma was pinned to the center, a knife embedded through it. Charles's voice echoed from a speakerphone nearby. Do what you have to do. Make sure this ends. Morales's smirk was cold. Consider it done. The morning air at the safe house felt heavier than usual. Christopher stood by the window, staring out at the quiet forest. Despite the public fallout of his father's empire, the warning from Maxwell lingered in his mind. Morales was still out there, and that meant Emma wasn't safe yet. Emma walked into the room, holding 2 mugs of steaming coffee. She placed one on the table beside him and studied his tense posture. You've been up all night, haven't you? She asked softly. He nodded, his gaze still fixed on the tree line. I can't let my guard down. Not until we know Morales is dealt with. Emma placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. You've done so much already, Christopher. You exposed your father. You protected me. Maybe it's time to let someone else take the fight. Christopher turned to her, his expression softening. I can't take that risk, Emma. Not with you. Before she could respond, Maxwell's car pulled into the driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust. Christopher opened the door before Maxwell could knock. Tell me you have good news, Christopher said as the detective stepped inside. Maxwell's face was lined with fatigue, but his eyes were sharp. Good and bad, we've tracked Morales. He's holed up in a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. And the bad? Christopher asked. Maxwell hesitated. He's not alone. He's got a crew, and they're armed. He's not going down without a fight. Christopher's jaw tightened. Then we take the fight to him. Emma's eyes widened. You can't be serious. I am, Christopher said firmly. This ends today. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking structure of rusted metal and broken windows. Christopher and Maxwell crouched behind a stack of crates, surveying the area. Maxwell's team, a small group of trusted law enforcement officers, was positioned around the perimeter. Inside, Morales paced the room, his expression impatient. The remnants of his crew were scattered, their weapons in plain sight. He'll come, Morales muttered. his gaze fixed on the door. He won't leave her unprotected. Christopher's voice broke the silence as he stepped into the doorway, his silhouette sharp against the dim light. "You're right. I won't." Morales turned, a smirk spreading across his face. "Langston, brave of you to come alone." Christopher took another step forward, his gaze unwavering. "You want me? Here I am. Let her go." Morales laughed, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "You think this is about her. This is about you. Your family destroyed lives, mine included. This is payback." Christopher's voice was steady, but his anger simmered beneath the surface. "You're nothing but a pawn for my father. You think this will bring you justice. It won't. It only makes you just like him." The words hit their mark, but Morales's resolve didn't waver. He raised his gun, but before he could fire, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse. Maxwell's team stormed in, shouting commands and weapons drawn. Chaos erupted. Morales's men fired back, but they were quickly overpowered by Maxwell's team. Christopher lunged toward Morales, tackling him to the ground. The two men grappled, their struggle fierce and desperate. Morales managed to throw Christopher off, reaching for his gun, but before he could aim, a single shot rang out. Maxwell stood behind him, his weapon steady. Morales dropped to the ground, clutching his shoulder and groaning in pain. "It's over," Maxwell said, his voice cold. "You're done." Hours later, back at the safe house, Christopher and Emma sat on the porch, the tension finally lifting. The news had spread quickly. Morales was in custody, and the Langston Empire was officially in shambles. For the first time in weeks, the air felt lighter. Emma leaned against Christopher, her head resting on his shoulder. "It's really over, isn't it?" Christopher nodded, his arm wrapping around her. "It is." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and hope. "What now?" Christopher smiled softly. "Now, we start over. No more running, no more hiding. Just us." Emma's lips curved into a smile, her heart swelling with the promise of a new beginning. "That sounds perfect." Far away, Charles Langston sat alone in his empty estate, the walls echoing with the silence of his downfall. His once unshakable empire lay in ruins, and his only son had turned against him. He stared at the headlines on his phone, the weight of his choices finally crashing down on him. For the first time, Charles Langston felt the sting of defeat, and he had no one to blame but himself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Christopher and Emma stood hand in hand, watching the world settle into quiet. They had fought for their future, faced unimaginable challenges, and emerged stronger together. For the first time in years, they felt free.